In a small village surrounded by green fields and tall trees, there lived a woman named Mira. She was known for her warm smile and kind heart. Everyone in the village liked her because she always helped others whenever they needed it. Mira had been married to Rajiv, a hard-working farmer who loved her deeply. Together they shared a simple but happy life, working on their small farm and dreaming of a brighter future. But happiness is often short-lived, and tragedy struck without warning one fateful day. Rajiv fell ill suddenly, and despite all efforts to save him, he passed away within days. The news of his death spread quickly through the village, leaving everyone shocked and heartbroken. Mira was devastated. Her world crumbled around her, and she felt as though she had lost not just her husband but also a part of herself. The days that followed were filled with tears, sleepless nights, and endless questions about how she would go on without him. At first, the villagers offered their condolences and support. Neighbors brought food to her doorstep, and friends sat with her during her darkest hours. But soon, things began to change. Mira's in-laws, Rajiv's parents and brother, started acting differently toward her. At first it was subtle. They stopped speaking to her warmly and avoided looking her in the eye. Then came the whispers behind closed doors. Some said Mira was cursed, that her presence brought bad luck to the family. Others claimed she must have done something wrong to cause Rajiv's untimely death. These rumors spread like wildfire, poisoning the minds of those who once cared for her. Mira tried to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on keeping herself busy. She spent hours tending to the farm, watering plants and feeding animals, hoping that staying active would dull the pain in her heart. But no matter how hard she worked, the tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day. Her mother-in-law, Sarita, became increasingly hostile. She blamed Mira for every little problem, from broken tools to poor harvests. "If only you hadn't come into our lives," Sarita spat one evening during dinner, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Mira froze, her hands trembling as she held her spoon. She wanted to defend herself, but the weight of grief and guilt made her silent. It wasn't long before the hostility escalated. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Mira found herself cornered in the kitchen. Her father-in-law, Ramdas, stood towering over her, his face red with anger. "You're nothing but trouble," he growled, pointing a finger at her. "You've brought shame to this family." Before she could respond, her brother-in-law Vikram grabbed her arm roughly and dragged her out of the room. Mira cried out in pain, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The next thing she knew, she was being pushed into a tiny storeroom at the back of the house. The door slammed shut behind her, and the sound of a heavy lock clicking into place echoed in the silence. The room was dark and suffocating, barely large enough for her to sit down. It smelled of damp wood and old grain sacks, and the air felt heavy with despair. Mira pounded on the door with all her strength, shouting for help, but no one came. Outside, her in-laws ignored her cries, pretending not to hear. Hours turned into days, and Mira realized with growing horror that this was no temporary punishment. It was her new reality. She was trapped, alone, and completely at the mercy of her captors. Food was scarce, and water even more so. Every few days, someone would slide a plate of stale bread or a bowl of thin soup under the door. Mira ate what she could, though it was never enough to fill her empty stomach. Her body weakened and her spirit began to falter. The bright spark that once defined her dimmed with each passing day. She spent hours staring at the cracks in the wooden walls, wondering if anyone outside still remembered she existed. Occasionally, she heard voices from the other side of the door, her in-laws talking about her as though she were already gone. "She's useless," Sarita would say coldly. "We should have gotten rid of her sooner." Despite the cruelty she endured, Mira refused to give up entirely. Deep down, she clung to a fragile thread of hope. She told herself that someone, somewhere, would notice her absence and come to her rescue. Perhaps a neighbor would grow suspicious of her sudden disappearance. Or maybe a distant relative would visit and demand answers. Whatever the case, Mira prayed silently every night, asking for strength and deliverance. She didn't know when, or if help would arrive, but she vowed to hold on for as long as she could. As weeks dragged on, Mira's mind began to play tricks on her. She imagined hearing footsteps approaching her prison, only to realize it was just the wind rattling the loose boards. Sometimes, she thought she saw shadows moving outside the cracks in the wall, but when she called out, there was never a response. Loneliness gnawed at her soul, and fear became her constant companion. Yet amid the darkness, something unexpected happened. Mira started to reflect on her life. She thought about her childhood, her dreams, and the love she had shared with Rajiv. Those memories gave her comfort, reminding her of who she truly was beneath the pain and suffering. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Mira heard something unusual, a soft rustling sound coming from outside the storeroom. At first, she dismissed it as another trick of her imagination. But then, the noise grew louder, accompanied by faint footsteps crunching on dry leaves. Her heart raced as she pressed her ear against the door, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it her in-laws? Had they finally decided to let her out? Or was it someone else entirely? Before she could dwell on the possibilities, the lock on the door clicked open. Light spilled into the room as the door creaked wide, momentarily blinding Mira. She squinted, trying to adjust to the brightness, and saw the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. He was tall and lean, with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through her. For a moment, Mira was too stunned to move. Was this yet another nightmare, or was salvation finally within reach? The man stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I'm here to help you." Though wary, Mira found herself believing him. There was something genuine in his tone, something that promised safety and freedom. Summoning the last ounce of courage she had left, she nodded and took his outstretched hand. As they stepped out of the storeroom together, Mira felt a rush of emotions, relief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of hope. Little did she know, this stranger would change her life forever, leading her on a journey she could never have anticipated. The man who had opened the door to Mira's prison introduced himself as Arjun. He spoke softly, careful not to startle her further. His voice carried a calmness that felt foreign yet reassuring after weeks of living in fear. Mira hesitated for a moment, unsure if she could trust him. After all, her in-laws were known throughout the village, and anyone helping her would surely face their wrath. But desperation outweighed caution. With trembling legs, she stepped out of the storeroom for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Arjun led her quietly through the shadows of the house, avoiding any noise that might alert her in-laws. They moved swiftly, sticking close to the walls until they reached the edge of the property. There, hidden behind a cluster of bushes, lay a narrow path leading into the forest. The cool night air brushed against Mira's face, and she took a deep breath, savoring the freedom it brought. For so long she had been confined to that tiny room, cut off from the world. Now, with each step away from the house, she felt a little lighter, as though a heavy weight was being lifted off her shoulders. As they walked deeper into the woods, Mira couldn't help but glance back at the distant lights of the village. A mix of emotions swirled inside her: relief, fear, and even guilt. She wondered what her in-laws would do when they discovered she was gone. Would they come looking for her? Would they punish someone else for her escape? These thoughts haunted her, but Arjun seemed unfazed. He walked confidently, his eyes scanning the dark forest around them. Occasionally he glanced at Mira, ensuring she was keeping up. "Are you hurt?" Arjun asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Mira shook her head, though her body ached from weeks of neglect and confinement. "No," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to worry anymore," Arjun said firmly. "I won't let anyone harm you again." Though his words were comforting, Mira struggled to believe him fully. How could this stranger promise such protection when even her own family had turned against her? Still she nodded, choosing to focus on the present rather than dwell on uncertainties. For now, she simply followed him, trusting that he meant no harm. The journey through the forest was long and tiring. Mira stumbled frequently over roots and rocks, her weakened body unaccustomed to walking long distances. Each misstep sent sharp pains shooting through her legs, but she bit her lip and pushed forward, unwilling to slow Arjun down. He noticed her struggles and eventually stopped to help her sit on a fallen log. From a small bag slung across his shoulder, he pulled out a flask of water and handed it to her. "Drink," he instructed gently. "You need your strength." Mira obeyed, taking small sips of the cool liquid. It felt refreshing, washing away some of the dryness in her throat. As she drank, Arjun studied her carefully. Her face was pale, her cheeks sunken and her once bright eyes dull with exhaustion. Despite her frail appearance, however, there was something resilient about her, a quiet determination that intrigued him. "You're stronger than you think," Arjun remarked after a while. "Not everyone could survive what you've been through." Mira looked up at him, surprised by his observation. No one had spoken to her with such kindness in months. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, feeling a lump rise in her chest. When they resumed their journey, Arjun explained where they were headed. He lived in a secluded part of the forest, far from prying eyes. It wasn't much, a modest shelter made of branches and leaves, but it offered safety and solitude. Mira listened intently, grateful for any information that helped ease her anxiety about the unknown. By the time they arrived at his hideout, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Arjun's shelter was simple yet functional. A makeshift bed of straw lay in one corner, covered with a thin blanket. Nearby, a small fire pit contained remnants of last night's flames. Tools and supplies were scattered neatly around the area, evidence of a man accustomed to living off the land. Though crude compared to her old home, the sight filled Mira with hope. Here, at least, she wouldn't be locked away or treated like a burden. "You can rest here," Arjun said, gesturing toward the bed. "You need to recover before we plan anything else." Mira hesitated, unsure how to respond. She had never expected to find refuge with an outlaw, a man rumored to be dangerous and unpredictable. Yet despite his reputation, Arjun showed her nothing but kindness. Slowly she lowered herself onto the straw mattress, wincing slightly as her sore muscles protested. Within moments, fatigue overwhelmed her, and she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. While Mira rested, Arjun busied himself preparing for the days ahead. He gathered wood for the fire, checked his traps for food, and kept watch over the surrounding area. Though he rarely stayed in one place for too long, he decided to linger longer this time, for Mira's sake. He knew she needed time to heal, both physically and emotionally, and he was determined to see her through it. Over the next few days, Mira began to regain some of her strength. Arjun taught her basic survival skills, how to identify edible plants, build a fire, and purify water. At first, these tasks seemed overwhelming, but with patience and practice, Mira grew more confident. She discovered a sense of purpose in learning new things, something she hadn't felt since Rajiv's death. During quiet moments, Arjun shared stories of his own life. He told her about growing up in a neighboring village, working hard to support his younger siblings after their parents passed away. One day he had been falsely accused of stealing grain from a wealthy landowner. Despite his innocence, no one believed him, and he was forced to flee to avoid punishment. Since then, he had lived as an outlaw, surviving on his wits and resourcefulness. Listening to his story, Mira realized they weren't so different. Both had faced injustice and betrayal, yet neither had given up entirely. This realization strengthened the bond between them. They spent hours talking, sharing laughter and tears, finding solace in each other's company. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Mira mustered the courage to ask a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Arjun paused, poking at the embers with a stick. "Because I know what it's like to be treated unfairly," he replied simply. "And because no one deserves to live like you did, not even for a single day." Tears welled up in Mira's eyes, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed. "Arjun," placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. "That's all that matters." As the days turned into weeks, Mira's health improved significantly. She gained back some of the weight she had lost and regained a bit of her former energy. More importantly, her spirit began to heal. The constant fear and despair that had consumed her started to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of hope. She no longer saw herself as a victim but as a survivor, someone capable of overcoming adversity. Still, the thought of returning to the village lingered in her mind. Part of her yearned to confront her in-laws, to demand justice for the suffering they had inflicted upon her. Another part feared facing them again, worried about what might happen if she returned. Arjun sensed her inner conflict and offered guidance without pushing her to make a decision. "Whenever you're ready," he said one night, "I'll stand by you. Whatever choice you make, I'll support it." His words gave Mira the courage she needed to consider her options. She realized she didn't have to rush into anything. For now, she was content to stay in the forest, learning from Arjun and rediscovering herself. But deep down, she knew her journey was far from over. Someday she would return to the village, not as a broken woman, but as someone stronger, braver, and determined to reclaim her dignity. As the days passed, Mira grew more comfortable in the forest. She learned to adapt to its rhythms, the way the birds chirped at dawn, the rustling of leaves when the wind picked up, and the eerie silence that fell just before dusk. Each new skill Arjun taught her made her feel a little more independent. She could now identify which plants were safe to eat, how to start a fire using flint and dry bark, and even how to set simple traps for small animals. These tasks kept her busy and gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. Arjun noticed the change in her. Her eyes, once dull with despair, began to sparkle again. Her movements became steadier, her voice clearer. He admired her resilience, knowing firsthand how difficult it was to rebuild oneself after being broken. Still, he couldn't shake off the feeling that Mira's journey wasn't over yet. Deep down, he knew she wouldn't be content staying hidden forever. Sooner or later, she would want answers, justice for what had been done to her. One evening, as they sat by the fire sharing a meal of roasted rabbit and wild berries, Arjun decided to broach the subject. "You've come a long way," he said, watching her carefully. "But have you thought about what comes next?" Mira paused, her hand hovering over the piece of meat on her plate. The question caught her off guard, though it wasn't entirely unexpected. She had spent countless nights lying awake staring at the stars, wondering whether she should return to the village. Part of her wanted to confront her in-laws and expose their cruelty. Another part feared the consequences of such an action. What if no one believed her? What if her in-laws retaliated against her, or worse, against Arjun? "I don't know," Mira admitted finally, setting the food aside. "I want to go back, but I'm scared." Arjun nodded, understanding her hesitation. "Fear is natural," he said. "But letting it control you means they win. You can't let them take away your life, not completely." His words struck a chord within her. For so long she had allowed fear to dictate her actions, or lack thereof. First it was fear of her in-laws' anger. Then it was fear of never escaping their clutches. Now it was fear of facing them again. But Arjun was right. Giving in to that fear meant surrendering her dignity and freedom all over again. And she refused to let that happen. Over the next few days, Mira wrestled with her decision. She spent hours pacing around the campsite, replaying every moment of her captivity in her mind. She thought about the lies her in-laws had spread, the rumors that had isolated her from the rest of the village. She remembered the looks of pity, and sometimes disgust, on the faces of those who once called her friend. Most of all, she remembered the loneliness, the crushing weight of being treated like an outcast in her own home. Finally, she came to a conclusion. "I need to go back," she told Arjun one morning as they prepared breakfast. Her tone was firm, leaving no room for doubt. Arjun raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He had expected this moment would come eventually. "Are you sure?" he asked simply. "Yes," Mira replied. her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I can't run away forever. If I do, they'll always have power over me. I won't let them win." Arjun smiled faintly, impressed by her resolve. "All right then," he said. "We'll go together." The plan was risky, but neither of them saw another way. They agreed to wait until nightfall, when the villagers would be asleep, to slip into the village unnoticed. Arjun suggested they gather evidence of Mira's mistreatment, anything that could prove her story. Letters, documents, or even witnesses might help sway the elders if things turned hostile. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they set out toward the village. The walk was tense, each step bringing them closer to uncertainty. Mira's heart pounded with every sound: the distant bark of a dog, the creak of a wooden gate, the soft murmur of voices carried by the wind. By the time they reached the outskirts of the village, the streets were eerily quiet, bathed in the pale glow of moonlight. They moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows to avoid detection. Their first stop was Mira's old house. It stood dark and silent, its windows shuttered tightly. Arjun signaled for her to stay back while he checked the perimeter. Finding the door unlocked, he gestured for her to follow him inside. The house smelled musty, as though it hadn't been aired out in weeks. Everything looked exactly as Mira remembered it, except now it felt foreign, almost hostile. She led Arjun to her former bedroom, where she hoped to find some personal belongings she could use as proof of her existence. Sure enough, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, she discovered a bundle of letters written by Rajiv during their early days of marriage. In them, he spoke fondly of their future plans, a testament to their love and shared dreams. "This will work," Mira whispered, clutching the letters tightly. Next, they searched for anything else that might support her case. In the storeroom where she had been imprisoned, they found remnants of her captivity: a cracked bowl, a torn blanket, and scraps of stale bread left behind. These items may have seemed insignificant, but together, they painted a vivid picture of neglect and cruelty. With the evidence secured, they quietly exited the house and made their way to the center of the village. There, under the ancient banyan tree, the elders often gathered to discuss important matters. Arjun suggested leaving the items there, along with a note explaining everything. Mira hesitated initially, worried about putting herself at risk, but ultimately agreed. "You're braver than you think," Arjun encouraged her as she wrote the letter. By the time they finished, the first rays of sunlight were beginning to peek over the horizon. Exhausted but determined, they retreated to the forest, waiting anxiously to see what would happen next. The following day, whispers rippled through the village. Villagers gathered under the banyan tree, examining the evidence left behind. Some were skeptical, dismissing it as a ploy to stir trouble. Others, however, couldn't ignore the truth staring them in the face. Among them was an elderly woman named Parvati, who had once been close to Mira's mother-in-law. Parvati approached the elders, her expression grave. "I've suspected something was wrong for a while," she confessed. "Sarita and Ramdas haven't been acting like themselves. And poor Mira, and she vanished without a word. Doesn't that seem strange?" Her words sparked a heated debate among the villagers. Accusations flew back and forth until finally, someone proposed calling Sarita and Ramdas to account for their actions. When confronted, the couple denied everything vehemently, but cracks began to show in their stories. Under pressure, they eventually admitted to locking Mira away, but only because they believed she was cursed. The confession shocked the crowd. Many turned their backs on Sarita and Ramdas, disgusted by their treatment of a grieving widow. Word spread quickly, reaching Mira and Arjun in the forest. Hearing the news filled Mira with a mix of relief and vindication. Justice had been served, albeit imperfectly. Encouraged by the turn of events, Mira decided it was time to reveal herself. With Arjun by her side, she returned to the village, stepping boldly into the sunlight. At first, the villagers stared in disbelief, unsure whether to trust their eyes. But as Mira recounted her ordeal, tears streaming down her face, their expressions softened. One by one they approached her, offering apologies and words of support. Her in-laws, humiliated and ostracized, slunk away, banished from the community they had once dominated. Mira inherited her rightful share of Rajiv's property, allowing her to rebuild her life on her own terms. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, she felt lighter, freer than she had in years. As for Arjun, he chose to disappear back into the forest, content knowing he had made a difference. Before leaving, he promised Mira they would meet again someday. And though their paths diverged, the memory of their unlikely friendship lingered, reminding them both that even in the darkest times, compassion could light the way. The days that followed Mira's return to the village were a whirlwind of emotions. At first, she felt overwhelmed by the attention she received. Neighbors who had once ignored her or whispered behind her back now approached her with sympathy and apologies. Some brought gifts, baskets of fresh fruits, jars of homemade pickles, and warm shawls to keep her comfortable during the chilly nights. Others simply offered hugs or kind words, expressing regret for not noticing her suffering sooner. Mira accepted their gestures graciously, though part of her remained cautious. She couldn't forget how quickly the same people had turned against her after Rajiv's death. Their sudden change of heart made her wonder if they truly understood her pain, or if they were merely acting out of guilt. Still, she chose to focus on the positives. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone. The villagers' support gave her strength, helping her take the first steps toward rebuilding her life. With her inheritance from Rajiv's estate, Mira decided to renovate their old home. It was a daunting task, but she refused to let fear hold her back. Each day she worked tirelessly, scrubbing away the layers of dust and grime that had accumulated during her absence. She repaired broken furniture, painted the walls a soft yellow, and planted new flowers in the garden. Slowly the house transformed into a warm and inviting space, a reflection of her resilience and hope for the future. As she worked, memories of Rajiv often surfaced. Sometimes they brought tears to her eyes, other times they filled her with gratitude for the love they had shared. To honor his memory, Mira created a small shrine in one corner of the living room. She placed his favorite books there, along with photographs and trinkets that reminded her of happier times. Every evening she lit a candle and spent a few quiet moments talking to him, sharing her thoughts and dreams as though he were still by her side. Despite her progress, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was missing. Arjun had left shortly after ensuring her safety, disappearing into the forest without so much as a goodbye. Though she understood why he had gone, he was an outlaw after all, his absence left a void in her heart. She missed his calm presence, his wisdom, and the way he always seemed to know exactly what to say when she needed it most. Without him, the world felt a little less steady. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, Mira spotted movement near the edge of the woods. Her heart skipped a beat as she squinted, trying to make out the figure in the distance. Was it Arjun? The thought sent a rush of excitement through her, but as the figure drew closer, she realized it wasn't him. Instead, it was Parvati, the elderly woman who had spoken up on her behalf during the confrontation with the elders. "May I join you?" Parvati asked, gesturing toward the bench beneath the mango tree. Mira nodded, offering her a seat. "Of course," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Would you like some tea?" Parvati smiled warmly. "That would be lovely." While Mira prepared the tea, Parvati admired the changes she had made to the property. "You've done wonders with this place," she remarked. "It feels alive again." "Thank you," Mira replied, handing her a steaming cup. "It's been hard work, but it's worth it." They sat together in companionable silence for a while, sipping their tea and watching the birds flit between the trees. Eventually, Parvati spoke. "I wanted to check on you," she said gently, "to see how you're doing." Mira hesitated before answering. "I'm better," she admitted. "But sometimes I feel like I'm still healing. Like there's a piece of me that's missing." Parvati nodded knowingly. "Grief is like that," she said. "It takes time to mend. But don't lose hope. You've already come so far." Her words comforted Mira, reminding her of how much she had overcome. Yet, deep down, she knew Parvati was right. It would take time. Healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a process, one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, Mira threw herself into her work. She reopened the small vegetable stall she and Rajiv had run together, selling fresh produce to the villagers. The business brought her joy, allowing her to interact with others and contribute to the community. Customers praised her kindness and the quality of her goods, and soon, her stall became one of the busiest in the market. But even as her days grew busier, Mira found herself thinking about Arjun more often. She wondered where he was, whether he was safe, and if he ever thought about her. On quiet nights, she imagined him wandering through the forest, free yet lonely. She hoped he was happy, wherever he was, and that he knew how grateful she was for everything he had done. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mira took a walk along the outskirts of the village. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers. As she strolled, she noticed a familiar path leading into the forest, the same one Arjun had used to guide her to safety. Without realizing it, her feet began to follow the trail, drawn by curiosity and longing. The deeper she ventured, the quieter the world became. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. After walking for what felt like hours, Mira reached a clearing she vaguely remembered from her escape. There, nestled among the trees, stood Arjun's makeshift shelter. Her heart raced as she approached, half expecting to find him waiting for her. Instead, the campsite was empty, its fire pit cold and overgrown with weeds. Disappointment washed over her, but she refused to leave without leaving a trace of her visit. Gathering some twigs and dry leaves, she started a small fire and sat beside it, staring into the flickering flames. Images of Arjun flashed through her mind. The way he had opened the storeroom door, the kindness in his voice, the determination in his eyes. She whispered a silent thank you, hoping the wind would carry her gratitude to him. As she prepared to leave, something caught her eye, a small wooden carving lying near the base of a tree. Picking it up, she examined it closely. It was a simple figure of a bird, its wings spread wide as though ready to take flight. Mira smiled, recognizing it as Arjun's handiwork. He must have left it behind intentionally, knowing she might return someday. Clutching the carving tightly, she felt a renewed sense of connection to him. Back in the village, Mira placed the wooden bird on her windowsill, where it could catch the morning light. Every time she looked at it, she felt a surge of courage and gratitude. Arjun may have been gone, but his impact on her life remained. He had taught her not only how to survive, but also how to stand up for herself and reclaim her dignity. And though their paths had diverged, she believed they would cross again someday. In the meantime, Mira focused on living fully and authentically. She embraced her role in the community, using her experiences to help others facing hardships. Whether it was comforting a grieving neighbor or standing up for someone being mistreated, she became a beacon of strength and compassion. Her story inspired many, proving that even in the darkest times, hope and resilience could prevail. And so life went on. Mira continued to heal, finding beauty in the everyday moments and solace in the memories of those who had shaped her journey. Though scars remained, they served as reminders of her strength and perseverance. She carried them proudly, knowing they were part of what made her who she was today. Months passed, and Mira's life in the village settled into a rhythm of purpose and peace. The days were filled with work at her vegetable stall, tending to her garden, and helping neighbors whenever they needed assistance. Her kindness and resilience had earned her respect among the villagers, many of whom now saw her as a pillar of strength. Yet despite the outward calm, there was still a part of her that longed for something more, something she couldn't quite put into words. The wooden bird Arjun had carved remained perched on her windowsill, catching the sunlight each morning. It became a symbol of hope for Mira, a reminder of the man who had saved her and taught her how to stand on her own 2 feet. She often found herself staring at it, wondering where he was and whether he ever thought about her. Though she understood his reasons for leaving, she couldn't help but wish he would return, even if only for a brief visit. One crisp autumn morning, as Mira arranged fresh vegetables at her stall, a group of children ran past her, laughing and chasing after a stray dog. Their joy was infectious, and for a moment, Mira forgot her worries, smiling as she watched them disappear around the corner. But then her gaze drifted toward the forest beyond the village, a place she rarely visited anymore but always kept in the back of her mind. Something about it called to her, urging her to explore its depths once again. That evening, unable to resist the pull any longer, Mira decided to take another walk along the forest path. Armed with a lantern and a small bundle of food, she stepped into the woods just as twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The familiar trail brought back memories of her escape with Arjun, the fear, the uncertainty, and eventually, the freedom. As she walked, she felt a strange sense of comfort, as though the forest itself were welcoming her home. When she reached the clearing where Arjun's shelter had once stood, she paused, taking in the sight before her. The campsite was still empty, untouched since her last visit. Yet this time, she noticed something different, a faint trail of footprints leading deeper into the forest. Curiosity got the better of her, and she followed the prints cautiously, her lantern casting soft light on the ground ahead. The trail wound through dense underbrush and towering trees until it opened up into another clearing. Here, nestled against a rocky outcrop, stood a new shelter, larger and sturdier than the one Arjun had built before. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney made of stacked stones, and the smell of wood smoke mingled with the earthy scent of the forest. Mira's heart raced as she approached, her pulse quickening with every step. Before she could call out, the door creaked open, and there he was, Arjun. He looked exactly as she remembered him, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm glow of firelight spilling from inside the shelter. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stared at each other, their eyes locking in silent recognition. "Mira," Arjun said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low and steady, but there was a hint of surprise in it. "What are you doing here?" I came to see if you were okay," Mira replied, her words tumbling out nervously. "I've been thinking about you, wondering where you went." Arjun studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. Inside, the shelter was cozy and inviting. A small table held plates of food, and blankets were neatly folded in one corner. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Mira sat down on a log bench near the fire, feeling both relieved and slightly awkward. She hadn't planned what to say, and now, face to face with Arjun, she wasn't sure where to begin. "You've done well for yourself," Arjun remarked, breaking the tension. "I heard about everything. You standing up to your in-laws, rebuilding your life. You've become stronger than I ever imagined." Mira blushed at the compliment, lowering her gaze. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "You saved me when no one else would. I owe you so much." Arjun shook his head. "You saved yourself," he corrected gently. "All I did was give you a chance. The rest was all you." His words touched her deeply, filling her with gratitude. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she wanted to say, to thank him properly, to express how much his presence meant to her. But before she could gather her thoughts, Arjun spoke again. "I've been keeping an eye on the village," he confessed. "From a distance, of course, I wanted to make sure you were safe." Mira's eyes widened in surprise. "You've been watching over me?" "Yes," Arjun admitted with a small smile. "It's hard to stay away when someone means so much to you." The honesty in his voice took her breath away. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Then, slowly, she smiled back. "I've missed you," she said softly. "More than I realized." They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing stories and laughter like old friends reunited after years apart. Arjun told her about his travels through the forest, the people he had helped, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Mira shared updates about the village, describing how much had changed since her return. As the hours passed, the initial awkwardness between them melted away, replaced by a deep sense of connection. Eventually, the conversation turned serious. "What happens now?" Mira asked, her tone hesitant. "Will you stay here or go back to wandering?" Arjun hesitated, considering his answer carefully. "I don't know," he admitted. "This life, it's not easy, but it's mine. And yet," he trailed off, looking at her thoughtfully, "being here with you makes me wonder if maybe there's another path I haven't considered." Mira's heart skipped a beat. "You mean staying in the village?" "Perhaps," Arjun replied, "but I'd need to find a way to earn the villagers' trust. They still see me as an outlaw, someone to be feared." "They'll come around," Mira assured him. "If they can forgive me for being a widow accused of bad luck, surely they can accept you too. Besides, I'll vouch for you. Everyone knows what you did for me." Her confidence gave him pause. For so long, he had lived on the fringes of society, never allowing himself to imagine a different future. But seeing Mira thrive, hearing her belief in him, it planted a seed of hope in his heart. Maybe, just maybe, he could build a new life here, one where he didn't have to hide anymore. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Mira prepared to leave. She promised to return soon, bringing supplies and news from the village. Arjun walked her to the edge of the clearing, his expression thoughtful but hopeful. "Thank you for coming," he said as they parted ways. "It means more than you know." Mira smiled, clutching the wooden bird she had brought with her. "Thank you for saving me," she replied, "and for showing me that I'm stronger than I thought." With that, she turned and began the journey back to the village, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, not for her, and certainly not for Arjun. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, with courage, with resilience, and perhaps with Arjun by her side. The days that followed Mira's visit to Arjun's shelter were filled with anticipation and quiet determination. She returned to the village with a renewed sense of purpose, her mind buzzing with ideas on how to help him integrate into the community. Though many villagers still viewed Arjun as an outlaw, she believed their opinions could change, if they only knew the truth about him. Mira began by sharing stories of Arjun's kindness and bravery with those closest to her. She told Parvati, who had become a trusted friend, about how Arjun had risked his own safety to free her from captivity. She described his compassion, his wisdom, and the way he had taught her to survive in the forest. At first, Parvati listened skeptically, but as Mira spoke, her expression softened. "He sounds like a good man," Parvati admitted after a long pause. "But convincing others won't be easy. People fear what they don't understand." "I know," Mira replied, "but if we can show them that he's not the monster they think he is, maybe they'll give him a chance." Together, they devised a plan. They decided to invite Arjun to the upcoming harvest festival, a celebration where the entire village gathered to share food, music, and laughter. It was an opportunity for him to meet the villagers in a neutral setting, away from the shadows of his past. Mira hoped that seeing him in person, surrounded by joy and unity, might soften their hearts. When she returned to the forest to share the idea with Arjun, he was hesitant. "What if they reject me?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "They won't," Mira assured him. "Not if they see you for who you really are. Trust me, I'll make sure of it." Her confidence gave him the courage to agree. Over the next few weeks, Mira worked tirelessly to prepare for the festival. She coordinated with other villagers, ensuring there would be enough food, decorations, and entertainment for everyone. Meanwhile, Arjun stayed in the forest, practicing what he would say and preparing himself mentally for the challenge ahead. Finally, the day of the festival arrived. The village square buzzed with excitement as families set up colorful stalls and decorated the area with lanterns and garlands. Children ran around playing games, while musicians tuned their instruments in preparation for the evening's performances. As dusk fell, the air grew cooler, and the aroma of freshly cooked dishes wafted through the crowd. Mira waited anxiously at the edge of the gathering, scanning the horizon for any sign of Arjun. Just as the festivities were about to begin, she spotted him walking toward her, dressed in simple yet clean clothes. His steps were slow and deliberate, betraying his nervousness, but his eyes met hers with quiet resolve. Smiling warmly, Mira took his hand and led him into the heart of the celebration. At first, the villagers stared in silence, unsure how to react to Arjun's presence. Some whispered among themselves, casting suspicious glances in his direction, but Mira didn't let their reactions deter her. Standing beside Arjun, she addressed the crowd, her voice clear and steady. "This man saved my life," she announced, drawing everyone's attention. "He showed me kindness when no one else did. He taught me strength when I thought I had none left. And now, he's here because he wants to start anew, to prove that he's more than the rumors say." A hush fell over the crowd as they listened to her words. Slowly, one by one, they began to step forward, offering cautious smiles or nods of acknowledgement. A young boy approached Arjun, handing him a piece of sweet cake. "Thank you," the child said shyly before running back to his parents. The gesture broke the ice, and soon others followed suit. An elderly farmer invited Arjun to try some roasted corn, while a group of women urged him to join their circle dance. Though he remained reserved, Arjun accepted each invitation graciously, his actions speaking louder than words ever could. By the end of the night, the villagers' initial wariness had transformed into curiosity, and even admiration. As the festival drew to a close, Mira found herself standing beside Arjun once again, watching the last of the lanterns float into the sky. "You did it," she said softly, her voice filled with pride. Arjun shook his head. "We did it," he corrected. "Without you, none of this would have been possible." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged through shared struggles and mutual respect. In that instant, Mira realized something she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. She cared for Arjun deeply. More than gratitude or friendship, it was love, pure and undeniable. Over the following weeks, Arjun gradually became a part of the village. He helped repair broken fences, assisted farmers during planting season, and even offered guidance to younger men seeking advice. His reputation as an outlaw faded, replaced by the image of a man dedicated to helping others. The villagers, once fearful of him, now welcomed him as one of their own. For Mira, life felt fuller than it ever had before. With Arjun by her side, she discovered a sense of belonging she hadn't known since Rajiv's passing. Together, they built a future rooted in trust, resilience, and hope. Their home became a place of warmth and laughter, filled with memories of both the past and the present. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Arjun turned to Mira with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what Rajiv would think of all this?" he asked gently. Mira smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I do," she admitted. "And I think he'd be happy for us. He loved life and he loved seeing others find happiness too." Arjun nodded, taking her hand in his. "Then we'll honor his memory by living fully, by being grateful for every moment we have." From that day forward, Mira and Arjun embraced their new chapter together, cherishing the love they had found amidst adversity. They proved that even in the darkest times, light could shine through, and that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the greatest joys. Their story became a testament to the power of compassion, forgiveness, and second chances, inspiring everyone who heard it to believe in the possibility of renewal.